Republicans dead. Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey folks, it's Rick Wilson and welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by Josh Rogin. Josh is one of the smartest guys in foreign policy, writing and reporting, and has thought a lot about where we are in the world today. And as the lead global security analyst for the Washington Post intelligence vertical, he is somebody that has thought a lot about America in the world, thought a lot about the moments that we face going forward in this big, great power competition between the U.S. and China in particular. Wrote a terrific book last year, War Under Heaven, about the U.S.-China relationship and what's going to happen going forward, with a lot of nuances and layers in there that I don't think a lot of the people that just bleat Chinese Communist Party over and over again have really thought through. But Josh, thank you for coming on the show today. And I wanted to start out with this really shocking moment in our politics in this country right now, with the dismantlement by Elon Musk and Donald Trump of USAID. And I would suspect 99% of the people screaming on social media platforms about USAID being a corrupt institution, blah, 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 did not know what USAID was a week ago. Talk to us about who's going to fill the gap with USAID disappearing from the world, and why this was such a consequential decision.
Right. I think it's a consequential decision on two levels. One, because this is the model that Musk and his bandits are going to use to try to replicate at various other agencies by barging their way in, firing a lot of innocent people from their jobs, thousands of innocent people from their jobs, damn the consequences, letting all of those consequences just happen without even really thinking about it, and then daring anybody to do anything about it. And so that's the big story. The precedent is that if USAID is allowed to be totally dismantled without so much as a hearing, without so much as a piece of legislation, without so much as a court case even, well, then it's game over for the Department of Education, for the FEMA, for whatever else it is that Musk and his band of idiots might have in their sights. So you have to sort of, even if you don't care about, I'm going to make the argument for USAID, Rick, but even if you don't care about USAID, you have to know that it's the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the government. And they might eventually come for a part of the government that you do care about. Now, here's the argument for USAID, okay? And this is, until 3 weeks ago, an argument that was made by a lot of Republicans, also a lot of Republican senators, even during the Trump administration, including amongst them Marco Rubio, but we'll get to that in a second.
Right.
The argument for USAID is that if you don't want to solve every problem with the military, you're going to need some other tools. And if you want to be involved in the world, and you believe being involved in the world is in America's interest, which I think it is, then you basically have, a $1 trillion a year military, and then you've got a $50 billion a year State Department and a $50 billion a year Development Department. Now, you get rid of those other two, you're just left with the military. And now anything that happens, whether it's a pandemic, a case of terrorism, extreme poverty leading to instability and an ally, refugees, migration, extremism, all of those things that happen outside of the borders of the United States, but that affect us, you're just going to have the military to deal with it. And how does that usually go? So for all of the anti-interventionalists in the MAGA right and all of the people in libertarian world who are like, oh, well, we have to stop using the military for every other thing, here's a cheaper alternative. Now, the third thing, which I guess the MAGA people don't care about, but I know that you care about, Rick, and a lot of people that I talk about care about, is that the way that Musk has done this is going to result in the death of thousands of innocent people needlessly for no reason. Okay. And that's inhumane and cruel. And, it's an atrocity to offer people hundreds of thousands of people life-saving food and medical care, and then pull it out from under them without any warning for no good reason at all, which will cause them to get sick and die, or to be born with diseases that they need not be born with. And yes, those things also affect us, but just on a human level, to not take 5 minutes to think about which people are going to die and which people aren't going to die that's sociopathic. That's the only real word you could use to describe it.
It strikes me like that Adam Serwer line from 5 years ago now was so on point. It's like the cruelty is the point very frequently with these folks.
That's right.
But in this case, I think the cruelty is the point, and it also merges with what they know to be ignorance about America's soft power. They none of these people that are in Elon's little orbit, these 20-year-old, hacker dudes, whatever they are, none of them understand anything beyond, a tiny little window of time. They don't get why USAID has been an adjunct to America's success in the world, and gives us the ability to achieve things. And like you said, it's the anti-interventionist dream. If you're Rand Paul, you should love USAID.
Exactly.
If you're Mike Lee, you should love USAID. But that sacrificing America's position in the world, that willingness to give up a tool of our success, strikes me as something that China is going to rapidly pick up the ball on. I mean, they've been spending an awful lot of time and investment in Latin America, in South America, and in Africa in the last few years, doing trade deals, doing mutual aid deals, doing Belt and Road across Africa and Asia to build up this sort of Chinese. I think the word they would love to use, but they won't in public, is a hegemon, economically and politically. So we're really walking off the battlefield, aren't we, by doing this in tons of these countries?
Right. No, yes, but it's actually worse than that. I mean, and here's the part of the conversation where you have to say the perfunctory line. Yes, there is waste, fraud, and abuse. Yes, there are programs that you or the person next to you might not be a fan of. No, it's not the way that it's described on Elon's Twitter feed or on the White House fact sheet, by the way, which is full of distortions and lies about USAID. But to be sure, there's fat to trim. But at the same time, we're not just talking about pulling up stakes in 80 countries, which is part of it, which is telling thousands of American citizens and their families, by the way, who went to hardship posts in far off places, yes, to help other people, but also to represent the United States of America, and telling them to go screw. And that, by the way, you better be on a plane by Friday. And I don't care if your kid's in school. I don't care what if you have another job. So it's not just betraying the federal workforce. It's what Ross Voigt said. They're trying to traumatize them. Right. And they are traumatized. And that's, that's not cool. Okay. And that who's going to want to work for the federal government? Who's going to want to ever serve their country if this is the way that they get treated? Now, what you're talking about is, yes, China will, and Russia and other countries will fill the gap. They'll rush into those places that we leave and say, see, the Americans don't care about you. The Chinese do. The Russians do. See, all of their, human rights talk about democracy and freedom and agency and dignity. That was all BS. And the reason we know is because Trump said it was all BS. And that's really the bigger loss here, is that what Donald Trump has done is he's conceded the point to the Chinese that the entire project of the United States as an idea that could be replicated, dating back to Thomas Jefferson, and not an empire of might, an empire of liberty, is that he doesn't believe in that. And he's the president of the United States, so therefore the United States government no longer believes in that, even if the people inside the United States government believe in that. And that, they're attacking not just USAID, but the National Endowment for Democracy, the International
IRI,
Republican Institute, which is, again, on the board of these organizations as of a month ago, were Elise Stefanik, Marco Rubio, Dan Sullivan, Joni Ernst. These are Lindsey Graham. These are not, rhinos. These are people who have already joined the MAGA movement, but still maintained that this was something important to do until 3 weeks ago, because now they're getting drowned out. And so now that not only can the Chinese go in and say, oh, we're going to save your children, where the Americans just abandoned them, they're going to say, oh, this whole idea that there's really any difference between good guys and bad guys, democracies and autocracies. We always said that was BS, but now we know it's BS because Trump said so. And in a way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if we don't believe in those things as a government, it's really hard to argue that we believe in them as a country.
So of this sort of great power, the two and a half great powers in the world. You wrote a lot in Chaos Under Heaven about Trump and Xi. And when you dig into today's Republican Party, there's a profound obsession with the CCP, with the Chinese Communist Party, and this idea that Trump is somehow the best person to negotiate a future with China. I want to talk to you about two things here. First, characterize for us the Trump-Xi relationship as you read it, as you see it. And secondly, I'd love for you to weigh in on this emergent theory of the case about giving up Taiwan because the tech bros want mainland China, Musk, Sachs, Thiel, and others, about where that future lies in this moment with Trump, because I feel as if China is going to be a bigger story than we anticipated in the last election.
Yeah, no, the U.S.-China relationship is simply the most important bilateral relationship in the world. It will be for the rest of our lives, and has been, in my estimation, for the last 20 years or so, even though we don't treat it that way, because Russia's waging a war in Ukraine that demands our attention. The Middle East is in fire, that demands our attention. So we're constantly in Washington missing the long term for the short term, and running to put out fires. So what else is new? But what's different about Trump is that he lords over his China policy by sort of lording over different factions in his orbit. And in the first term, those factions totally disagreed with each other on everything, and Trump would meander through them with varying levels of intentionality or even awareness. Now, so you have the super hawks like Pete Navarro and Steve Bannon say, bring down the CCP. We have to turn over their government. Set aside that Bannon was getting paid by a fake dissident billionaire who turned out to be a Ponzi scheme artist who was actually working with the Chinese government as a false flag. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, and that guy's in prison. But that's not part of this explanation. Then you've got the hardliners. These are people who want a tough policy on China, but don't think it's our job to bring down their government. Then you have the Wall Street clique, and then you have the added ones, which are the tech bros. And Wall Street clique and the tech bros are aligned because they're going to tell you, oh, China's not a problem. We just got to get along. Don't worry about Taiwan. That's none of our business. Okay. And the problem with President Trump, well, one of the many problems with President Trump is that above all of that sits his relationship with Xi Jinping. He thinks they're best friends. He told me that they're best friends. And if it wasn't for COVID, they would have solved the U.S.-China relationship a long time ago. For Xi Jinping, I'm sure that he thinks Trump is a great mark.
Yes,
he's just like the perfect mark. He calls him up and he tells him things, and President Trump's like, oh yeah, why would my good friend Xi Jinping lie to me? That doesn't make any sense. You kind of see the same thing with Putin, and now all of a sudden he's gonna change U.S. policy based on that conversation. Like when Xi Jinping told Trump that the coronavirus was gonna go away when it got warmer, and Trump believed, and that's the kind of craziness that is running our policy. And the fact that these tech, the broligarchy or whatever you want to call them, are very happy to abandon Taiwan should tell you all that you need to know about where their priorities lie, because they don't care anything about what the Taiwanese people think about it. All they care about is the chips. And so their strategy is we take the chips and then we abandon Taiwan. As if, first of all, two big problems with that. You can't do it because it's a 40-year supply chain that they built meticulously.
And TMSC is not going to just up and move.
No, and they're investing, and to the extent that they're investing here in the bill that is called the Chips and Science Bill, Trump is trying to kill that for some odd reason that no one could really figure out. And so, yeah, it's clear. I asked Trump about Taiwan, and when I interviewed him, and he said, we're 8,000 miles away. China's 2 feet away. If they attack, there isn't an effing thing we could do about it. That's what he said. He doesn't really care. Okay. But there are people in his administration who do care. The question is, can they do enough to keep U.S. policy close enough so that we don't hand Taiwan to the Chinese? We don't know. I'm very, very concerned about that. And because, Sachs and Musk and all these guys have such clear conflicts of interest, such obvious conflicts, financial conflicts of interest, and because they so outwardly are proud of the fact that they don't care about whether the Taiwanese people have any say in what their future is.
Right.
That is an unprecedented danger to our longstanding policy of supporting Taiwan's ability to determine its own future. Not that we want
damn near 75 years now.
Yeah, and it's not perfect, but it has kept the peace for 75 years. So the question is, when you upend that, are you really keeping the peace, or are you just inviting the Chinese to swallow up Taiwan? And even if we don't react, that's still a horrible thing, not just for the Taiwanese, but for the region and for the world, because it will give China unchecked power, not only over the first island chain, but also over all the semiconductors. And it's a nightmare scenario for our economy. Again, if you don't care about human rights, and I do, if you don't care about democracy and the Taiwanese people's ability to not live on their knees, I do. But if you don't, you should think that about how 60% of the world's shipping goes through the Taiwan Strait, and whether or not we want to have that vulnerability to the CCP, which by the way happens to be a genocidal mafia organization that runs the biggest country in the world.
Right.
And it's not going away, and we can't make it go away. We shouldn't try, but we shouldn't help them because their aim is against us. They mean us harm.
Yeah, I mean that old Russian line of where the U.S. is the main enemy. The Chinese folks, they do view us. The Chinese government views us as the main enemy. They are not just we just want to get our economy moving. We're an emerging democracy. It's not. These are a group of extremely dangerous people who, and again, I think the phrase you used was perfect. They look at Trump as a mark. I've known a lot of people who've done a lot of business in China, both on the tech side and the development side, and the idea of the vulnerable Westerner who is easily tricked by the Middle Kingdom is so deeply wired into their DNA. It's not just at the government level; it's at every other level. But you're right; it is also I think maybe this is one of the other reasons Trump may like it. It is a corrupt autocracy. It is
right.
It is
he gets
his
it.
business model.
They're a bunch of thugs, and he's a thug, and so they like each other. Yeah, that we can easily understand. But what's going to happen when Trump does the tariffs again, and the Chinese are better prepared because they've seen this movie before, and they've got a bigger economy than last time. And then all of a sudden, they're not chasing us for technology; we're chasing them for technology because they spent the last 8 years investing in science and innovation and research, and Trump's cutting all of that stuff. So, there's just no coherence. There's just no way that you could look at the tariffs and cutting the National Science Foundation and then look at the competition with China and say, oh yeah, all of that can be explained in some sort of 4-degree chess. It's not the case. Okay, it's a total mess.
There's never been any 4-degree chess, folks.
No.
It's always been emotional.
I call it hungry hippos. It's hungry hippos. That's Trump foreign policy.
It really is.
Yeah.
And now that and look, I know Marco Rubio, and I can tell you, Marco is a guy who wants to please his boss of the moment, and he is going to. I think he's going to be unable to cast a shadow beyond Trump with the Chinese. I don't think they're going to respect him or greet him as a peer. I won't be surprised if he gets greeted by like the third deputy minister of international affairs at the airport when he
why would they? They're gonna focus on people that are amenable to them. They're gonna invite Elon and his mom and then they're gonna have the Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary. Why would they deal with Marco Rubio at all? He's people inside the State Department think he won't last a year. Okay, they say that Rick Grenell is waiting in the wings. And, who did the big Venezuela deal, not the Secretary of State. He was sent to do the non-deal on Panama. So Rick Grenell is gunning for Marco Rubio. And, so Marco Rubio can't stray from the script, even to save USAID, which he clearly believes should be saved, but he just won't lift a finger to do it because he's that, impotent. He's that lacking of any ability to stray or stand up for anything.
It really takes a lot to make Rex Tillerson look like the alpha male in the room.
That's crazy.
on foreign policy. So I want to talk to you a little bit about one of the other Trumpian obsessions right now, where the non-interventionists of the Republican Party, who said that Trump would keep us out of wars and foreign conflicts and complex international hoo-ha, suddenly love, and I was told the election was about groceries and gas prices, not Gaza and Greenland. Give our audience some perspective on the scope of the calamity that awaits the United States if Donald Trump tries to, quote unquote, buy Gaza and develop it into a luxury resort.
Right. No, I mean, I remember this when Jared first pitched it a year ago, and it was just as crazy then as it is now. And, there's basically two theories. One, that this is like some sort of negotiating tactic by Trump to get, the Hamas to, concede on whatever it is that he wants them to concede on before the next ceasefire. Again, that's kind of like, are they really that organized? Do we really think the Trump team is really like, I don't think so, right? The other theory is that Trump actually believes this is a real thing, and all of the Republicans and all the MAGA people have to just like do the clapping seals thing because they have no other choice. Because that's how the Chinese Communist Party runs. It's like,
sure.
Or Kim Jong-un. It's like if you stand up and he says, okay, now we're going to go invade Venus, everyone's like, okay, they have to do that.
And don't be the first guy to stop clapping.
Right. Or you get frog marched out and they never hear from you again. And so, to watch these Republicans twist themselves into knots to pretend like there's any not only merit or that it's not what it is, which is a proposal to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, that's the definition of it, to move mass people out against their will. Now, he may believe in his head they're going to go willingly, but they're not. So the only way is unwillingly. And again, if he's not willing to commit a troop to do that, then there's no way to do that. So in other words, he's sacrificed American moral standing and jeopardized his own ceasefire deal and alienated all of America's Gulf allies and Arab allies for nothing, because it'll never happen, for no reason, for no tangible benefit. That's the level of stupidity that we're dealing with. And you have half of the Congress just being like, oh yeah, that's brilliant, even though they know it's idiotic. And that's an unsolvable problem. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's any op-ed or podcast that's going to solve the problem where he makes it the official foreign policy of the United States of America to pursue an ethnic cleansing that we're not going to be able to actually do, even if he tried to implement it. And half of the Congress is like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, I don't see any problems with that at all.
I mean, half of this, I mean,
that's through the looking glass stuff, right?
Right.
That's like, that's
right.
bad.
A friend of mine who was involved in a former general officer who was a retired general officer said to me, he goes, the analogy here is like our entanglement in Somalia, only orders of magnitude more dangerous. If you send in contractors and non-military folks, they're going to start getting killed day one, hour one. And then you're going to have to send in a footprint to guard those people. Then you're going to have to send in the logistics chain. And then the attacks start on our soldiers and on the logistics chain. And then you give, and he pointed this out to me, and it was so smart. He's like, you give every apocalyptic imam out there in the world the final thing to say, see, we told you the Crusaders were coming to take our sacred land, and we told you the Crusaders were coming. And I feel like I feel like our long entanglement in the Middle East, we learned a few things, but apparently we haven't learned that one. Like, don't go to the Holy Land.
Right. And don't tell a bunch of millions of poor Arabs and Muslims that you're going to steal their land and displace them, because that tends to radicalize them. That tends to increase the extremism.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, all the people that you would need to resettle them, you just fire because they're in the UN and the US and USAID. Those are the people that deal with poor people that we want to deal with, and you just fired all of them. And and by the way, why would they make a ceasefire deal now for phase 2 to extend it when this is what's on the horizon? They wouldn't, right? So we're actually going to see a resumption of the war, I think, which is going to be now with the Israelis having the president of the United States telling them that like none of that land belongs to the Palestinians anyway, so don't worry about it. And it's just a recipe for more atrocities and more disaster, more extremism. And just like the killing of USAID is the recipe for more pandemics. And and the best Trump could hope for is that this happens after he leaves office, if he leaves office, because all of these chickens will come home to roost, and by then it'll be too late. And you can't build back these capabilities once you've lost them, and you can't build back America's moral standing once you've squandered it. But I don't see any of that changing, because clearly the president of the United States doesn't give a crap about any of that. And there aren't any Republicans who are going to say anything publicly, even the ones who are on the boards of the organizations that he's destroying. So it's really an unprecedented nightmare scenario for, millions of people that depend on 40% of the UN, of the world's humanitarian organizations are going to close. And for what? For some sort of victory on social media that none of these people are ever going to experience, as they're like wondering what happened to their medicine and the food that they were getting,
and wondering why their kids are going to start learning Mandarin at the schools the Chinese will set up in Niger or Cameroon or wherever.
And
all of it.
And all of that Chinese investment and development is problematic, and it comes with all of these crazy consequences. But it's better than nothing. And these countries won't be in a position to refuse it, and we won't be in a position to say anything about it. And it's really bad.
I wonder. Going back to, you were mentioning that nobody's going to say anything. I mean, I wonder how Lindsey Graham sleeps at night. He is a guy who was John McCain's wingman. I know Lindsey personally. This is a guy who for years talked about the value of American soft power and American hard power. But I wonder if there's any moment where these guys are going to go, listen, boss, we can't do this anymore. I don't think there is anymore. I think they've collapsed that far down the sort of moral collapse scale.
I agree. I think in the first Trump term, a lot of these guys, especially Lindsey, would make the argument to people who are not in Trump's world that, hey, I can influence the mob from the inside. I can steer the mob from the inside. And there were isolated examples when that did happen.
Sure.
In the first term. In the second term, Trump term, I don't see that at all. Okay. Because I don't see them trying to do that, because there's no room for dissent even inside the MAGA world these days. And so there's no real internal debate. There's, by the way, total confusion and communication breakdown, and even the people in the White House don't know what Elon's doing. So for Lindsey to try to say that, like, if he would to try to say that, oh, don't worry, I'm steering the mob away from the worst things, is not credible. I don't even think he would try to say that. And so that's what you're dealing with. There's no middle ground. There's no internally. What the other thing that's really shocking to me is, like, a lot of the first term MAGA people who are inside the administration are under attack inside the administration, but their attacks are public. And if you know where to find them, you can see the MAGA people, even from outside the administration, attacking people in the State Department, in the NSC, who are Trump appointees. And so they're just not screwing around this time with anybody who doesn't, immediately bow and immediately say that Elon is, like, look at Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, 3 weeks ago, was calling Elon every name in the book, saying he was compromised by the CCP, that he had to go. 3 weeks later, you don't really hear that anymore, right? Even Steve Bannon, who's, I mean, for all of his faults, pretty fearless, has now decided that, like, there's a limit to, like, criticism that he can make of Trump and Elon. And so that's the environment they're in. And then there's everybody else who's like, wait a second, this is awful. And there's no go-betweens anymore. There's no fence sitters. And the problem is that the people who are the applauding seals, they're winning. They're clearly winning. They're clearly moving faster. Democrats are on their back foot. They have no plan. I was at a Super Bowl party with a bunch of Republicans and a bunch of Democrats last night, and all the Democrats were like, "Oh, don't worry, we have this bill that we're gonna introduce, and then we're gonna hold up the nominees for this department. You're gonna hold up the nominees. They don't care about nominees.
They'll temporarily appoint
they don't care about
one of them.
bills.
Right.
You know what I mean? They don't care about this person's going to be confirmed or not confirmed. They're all playing the based on, like, rules that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That rules that don't apply anymore. Oh, we're going to hold up the budget because we think a government shutdown will be viewed as worse in the eyes of the. No. They're trying to shut down the government. You're going to actually help them. They're trying to wreck the government. And you're going to what? And your counter is a government shutdown. Like, I mean,
right. You're going to pour gas on the fire.
Yeah, they're playing into their strategy. They're too slow. They're too out of touch. And they're losing. The Democrats are losing. The sane people are losing.
They have had a real hard time getting up off the mat after the election, and they've had a hard time. Now, listen, believe me, my Democratic friends are not great at even accepting tough love. They need to be in a different posture, but. And when you got Chuck Schumer saying, we're going to wait and see, and the American people will see what he's doing. And will they? Will they, though? By when? By when exactly? So, Josh, before we go, I want to talk to you a little bit about, you wrote an article the other day about or today, I think, about Putin and Trump and Ukraine. I had my criticisms of the Biden administration's slow walk on a lot of stuff. Where do you see Trump getting played by Putin on Ukraine right now? Because I want people to hear that, because I think it is coming, and I think it's going to be horrendous.
Yeah, no, very soon, actually. So this weekend, I'll be headed to Munich for the Munich Security Conference. The Ukrainians will be there. Keith Kellogg, Trump's envoy on Ukraine, will be there. He's not like, the greatest strategic thinker I've ever met, but he actually does understand the world, and he actually does care about Ukraine for what that's worth. His daughter leads an NGO that helps Ukrainians. So I consider him a serious person, at least in the Trump context. Sure. And then he's going to go to Kyiv. Okay. I think, that's what the rumor is. And then he's going to try to go to Moscow. The problem is that the Russians don't want to play. The Ukrainians they're like, okay, we're in a new world. Trump wants to make a deal.
Right.
You know what I mean? Well, we're gonna hear him out on this thing, and at least try not to get blamed for when it all goes south. But the Russians are like, no, screw you. And by the way, here's our terms. Now, the reason that Trump is susceptible to that is because he wants a deal so bad. It's the classic poor negotiating, that he's obviously able to put more pressure on the Ukrainians than on the Russians, who are already under lots of heavy sanctions. And all the concessions that he can make are really concessions to Putin. So Putin, again, this is the second time around, just like Xi Jinping. He gets this guy more. He understands his instincts and how to sort of play him. So yeah, he's going to hold the tough line, keep attacking, and then just wait for Trump to make the concessions. And all of those concessions will cost Ukrainian lives. And the Ukrainians are stuck because they can't say no to Trump. Putin can say no, Ukrainians can't. So they just have to sort of eat it and hope that it's not that bad, or at least hope that Putin makes so many demands that even Trump is like, oh my God, that's too much. I can't sell that. Right. And so that's the dynamic we're in, where Putin is playing Trump by, doing what Trump thinks he's good at doing, taking a tough negotiating position and forcing your negotiating partner to capitulate. And because Trump and his team are so desperate for what they call peace, which really could mean Russian victory if that's the deal, that they're likely, that I think they're in danger of walking into that trap. I hope they don't. I hope Kellogg gets there and he says, oh no, we can't, that like even these terms are too ridiculously pro Putin for Trump to put
sell
forth, but you never know.
I am they have fought a damn good fight, but I think they could be undermined in about 5 minutes if Donald Trump picks up on the wrong
remember,
side
Rick, we learned something from the Syrians this year, okay? Because we abandoned the Syrians. They were bombed by the Russians and the Iranians and the Assad regime and Hezbollah for 14 years. They never stopped fighting, okay? Yep. And this is what the Trump people don't understand. This is what the MAGA world gets wrong. They think that if we throw Ukraine under the bus, that the war will end. But it's wrong. The Ukrainians will never stop fighting because it's their lives. It's their country. They don't want to live on their knees. They don't want to be ruled by Putin. For the Syrians, it took 14 years. And I hope it doesn't take that long for the Ukrainians, but that's largely up to Trump and his cohort.
I had a friend in Ukraine the day of the invasion. I said, oh my God, because everyone thought they were going to do a classic Russian armored thrust, several motorized rifle divisions right into the middle of Kyiv. And I said, I'm so sorry. Can I do anything? What's going to happen? And he says, fuck it. I'm teaching my chemistry students how to make Molotov cocktails today. I've got sledgehammers. We're gonna crack holes between buildings. And I was like, that's the bravest motherfucker I ever met. Yeah. Because they were willing to sacrifice everything. And I think that is something that I think you're right. I think Trump underestimates that. And it doesn't mean Moscow will stop getting hit with drones, kids. It means the war will change. It'll be uglier and different. Right. But a lot of the stuff the Ukrainians have innovated on with drone warfare in particular, it scales back to guerrilla warfare if they have to.
Sure. So people don't like to live on their knees.
Absolutely not. Hey, well, Josh Rogin, brother, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Tell folks where they can reach you on social media.
On at Josh Rogin on Instagram and X.
All right.
Come find me there.
Very good. Well, thank you again for coming on the enemies list today. Folks, we will be
and Blue
back.
Sky.
And Blue Sky. Yes. Yes. The nice place.
Almost forgot.
Well, folks, we'll be back again with another episode later this week. We look forward to having you then. Thanks so much for turning into the enemies list once again.